Hi, my name is Andu, and today I want to share my personal story about how I became a fluent English speaker. I wasn't always confident in my ability to speak English. In fact, my journey was full of challenges, moments of self-doubt, countless mistakes, and times when I felt like giving up. But those challenges also taught me some incredible lessons that shaped who I am today. Over the next 2 hours, I'll take you on an emotional and practical journey through my experiences, struggles, and breakthroughs. This story is about perseverance, growth, and how a few life-changing methods transformed my approach to language learning. I want you to feel as if you're walking beside me in those early days, facing the same fears and discovering the same victories. I'll share not only the techniques I used but also the mindset shifts that helped me push through difficult moments. So sit back, relax, and join me as I recount how it all unfolded, how I went from a nervous beginner to someone who now confidently speaks, teaches, and even dreams in English. It was a beautiful summer day when I first arrived in London, a city full of endless possibilities and new beginnings. I remember sitting on the train, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels blending with the hum of conversations around me. My suitcase rested beside me, packed with clothes, a few cherished books, and a heart full of hope and nervous anticipation. Two women sat opposite me, speaking in rapid English that sounded almost musical. I could catch a word or two, but most of it was beyond my understanding. My mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Should I try to talk to them? What if they don't understand me? What if I embarrass myself and they laugh? My pulse quickened as the possibilities swirled in my head. After a few moments of hesitation and a deep breath, I decided to go for it. What did I have to lose? "Hello," I said hesitantly, my voice trembling slightly. It was barely louder than a whisper, but it felt like I had just shouted in a room full of strangers. The women paused mid-conversation, their eyes lighting up with friendly curiosity. I could feel the heat rising to my face as I struggled to form a coherent sentence. "I just arrived," I stammered, searching for words like lost puzzle pieces scattered in my mind.
"I want improve English."
The sentence was far from perfect, but to my surprise, they smiled warmly and nodded in understanding.
"Welcome to London," one of them said.
"It's great that you're practicing your English already. You'll get better in no time." The warmth in their voices melted my anxiety. Suddenly, the conversation flowed more naturally. We talked for about 10 minutes, mostly me listening and occasionally adding a word or two. Before we parted ways, they handed me their contact information. "Feel free to reach out if you ever need help or want to practice," they said. As they waved goodbye, I sat back in my seat, replaying the entire interaction in my head. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. It felt like a small but significant victory. That brief exchange was more than just a conversation. It was a spark that ignited a deeper determination in me. I knew then that I couldn't let fear hold me back anymore. Every mistake was a step toward improvement. Every word learned was a new tool in my growing arsenal. Over the next few days, I found myself reflecting on that moment again and again. I promised myself that from that day forward, I would take every opportunity to practice, no matter how uncomfortable it felt at first. I started small, watching English movies with subtitles, translating short texts, and speaking out loud to my reflection in the mirror. Each effort, no matter how small, added up. To my surprise and relief, they understood me perfectly. They smiled warmly and responded with words of encouragement. It was as if they could sense how much courage it took for me to initiate that conversation. "You're doing great. Keep practicing," one of them said with a reassuring nod. Our conversation may have lasted only 10 minutes, but it felt like a major milestone in my journey. I was no longer just a passive learner. I was now an active participant in real-world conversations. Before we parted ways, they handed me their contact information and said, "If you ever need help with English or want to explore London, feel free to reach out." Those words were more than a friendly gesture. They were an open door to a new world of possibilities. As the train pulled into my station, I clutched the slip of paper tightly in my hand, filled with a renewed sense of purpose. That brief interaction stayed with me for days, replaying in my mind like a favorite scene from a movie. Each time I thought about it, I noticed something new: how I had managed to convey my thoughts despite my limited vocabulary, how their patience gave me confidence, and how every small success could build on the next. It was that very moment on the train that sparked a deeper determination within me. I began to analyze what I could do better and how I could prepare for similar opportunities in the future. Over the next few days, I made a plan. I would immerse myself in English as much as possible. I started by watching English movies with subtitles, listening to English podcasts while walking around the city, and translating short texts from English to my native language and back again. My goal was simple: turn English into a part of my everyday life. And it wasn't always easy. Some days were frustrating, especially when I couldn't understand certain phrases or when my pronunciation seemed off. But I reminded myself that progress wasn't linear. Each mistake was a stepping stone toward fluency. With every conversation I had, my confidence grew. 6 months later, I could hardly recognize the timid person I had been on that train. My vocabulary had expanded, my listening comprehension had improved, and most importantly, I was no longer afraid to speak. That first conversation on the train was the catalyst I needed, and it taught me the most important lesson of all: to embrace every chance to use the language, no matter how imperfect my attempts might be. That brief interaction was a turning point. It sparked something inside me, a determination to get better, to speak with confidence, and to embrace every opportunity to learn. Over the following days, I replayed that conversation in my head countless times, analyzing what I said and how I could improve. I promised myself that I would work on my English every single day. I began by watching films with English subtitles, carefully noting how words were pronounced and used in different contexts. I translated short texts and practiced speaking out loud in front of a mirror, pretending I was having a conversation. 6 months later, I felt a noticeable difference in my abilities. My vocabulary had grown, my listening skills had sharpened, and my confidence had blossomed. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of frustration, days when I doubted myself, and times when I felt stuck. But each setback was a reminder of how far I had come. By the time I decided to enroll in an English course in London, I was no longer the timid beginner I had been on that train. I was ready to take on new challenges and push my limits even further. That brief interaction inspired me to work on my English every single day. I watched films, translated texts, and immersed myself in the language as much as I could. 6 months later, I felt more confident and decided to enroll in an English course in London. My first day at the language school was truly eye-opening and overwhelming in the best way possible. The classroom buzzed with energy as students from all over the world introduced themselves, each carrying their unique accent, background, and reason for learning English. Some were there to advance their careers, while others simply wanted to connect with new cultures. It was a melting pot of dreams and aspirations, and I could feel the potential in the air. Our teacher, a vibrant and passionate educator named Miss Thompson, radiated enthusiasm from the moment she walked in. With a warm smile and an unmistakable sparkle in her eyes, she immediately set the tone for what would be a transformative experience. Welcome everyone, she said, her voice exuding warmth and encouragement. This is not just a language class, it's a journey. Here, we don't just learn English, we live it.
I was intrigued.
Miss Thompson went on to explain that her approach to teaching was unconventional but highly effective. Forget about memorizing endless grammar rules, she said. You won't be filling out tedious worksheets or cramming vocabulary lists. Instead, we'll focus on what matters most, using English to communicate. Every word you speak is a step forward, even if it's not perfect. Her words caught my attention. This was different from anything I had experienced before. Until that moment, my idea of learning English had always been tied to textbooks, grammar exercises, and endless drills. I had spent countless hours trying to memorize verb conjugations and irregular nouns, only to forget them in real conversations. But here was a chance to break free from that rigid structure. Forget perfection, she continued. Our goal is progress. Speak as much as you can, even if you make mistakes. The more you use English in real situations, the faster you'll improve. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time, I realized that I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to try. And so, that's exactly what I did. Throughout that first lesson, Ms. Thompson guided us through activities that emphasized real-life communication. We practiced introducing ourselves, describing our hobbies, and sharing stories about our favorite foods and places. The classroom quickly turned into a lively space filled with laughter, shared experiences, and constant learning. The energy was contagious. Suddenly, speaking English felt less like a chore and more like an exciting challenge. My classmates, who were initially strangers, quickly became my allies on this journey. We encouraged each other, laughed at our mistakes, and celebrated every small victory together. The highlight of the day was when Miss Thompson introduced us to the concept of shadowing, a technique that would later become one of my most valuable learning tools. Shadowing, she explained, is a powerful way to improve your pronunciation and rhythm. You listen to a native speaker and repeat exactly what they say, as quickly and accurately as you can. It's like following their shadow.
Don't worry if it feels strange at first.
It's one of the best ways to train your ear and mouth to work together. I couldn't wait to try it. The idea of mimicking native speakers felt like an adventure. We started with short audio clips, repeating phrases over and over. At first, it was challenging. My tongue stumbled over unfamiliar sounds, and I struggled to keep up with the pace. But Miss Thompson encouraged us to keep going. You'll be surprised how quickly your brain adapts, she said with a reassuring smile. By the end of the class, I already felt more connected to the language than I ever had before. It wasn't just about learning English anymore, it was about experiencing it. This wasn't going to be just another course, it was the beginning of a whole new way of thinking, speaking, and seeing the world around me. I left that classroom feeling energized and ready for whatever lay ahead.
Welcome everyone, she said.
Here, we don't learn English the traditional way. You won't be memorizing endless grammar rules or filling out tedious worksheets. Instead, we'll focus on something much more important, using English for real communication. Her words caught my attention. This was different from anything I had experienced before. Until that moment, my idea of learning English had always been tied to textbooks, grammar exercises, and vocabulary lists. I felt a mix of curiosity and relief. Could it really be that simple? Forget perfection, she continued. Our goal is progress. Speak as much as you can, even if you make mistakes. The more you use English in real situations, the faster you'll improve. Her advice was exactly what I needed. I had always dreaded traditional grammar drills and tests. This approach was fresh and encouraging. Throughout that first lesson, she introduced us to various activities that prioritized speaking, listening, and engaging with each other in English. We practiced introducing ourselves, describing our favorite hobbies, and sharing funny stories from our home countries. The energy in the classroom was contagious. Suddenly, speaking English felt less like a chore and more like an exciting challenge. The highlight of that day was when she introduced us to the concept of shadowing, a technique I had never heard of before but would later become a cornerstone of my learning journey. Shadowing, she explained, is a powerful way to improve your pronunciation and rhythm in English. You listen to a native speaker and repeat exactly what they say, as quickly and accurately as you can. It's like following their shadow.
Don't worry if it feels strange at first.
It's one of the best ways to train your ear and mouth to work together. I couldn't wait to try it. The idea of mimicking native speakers felt like an adventure in itself. We started with short audio clips, repeating phrases over and over. At first, it was challenging. My tongue tripped over unfamiliar sounds, and I struggled to keep up with the pace. But our teacher encouraged us to keep going. "You'll be surprised how quickly your brain adapts," she said with a reassuring smile. By the end of the class, I already felt more connected to the language than I ever had before. It wasn't just about learning English anymore, it was about living it. This wasn't going to be just another course. It was the beginning of a whole new way of thinking, speaking, and experiencing the world around me.
Her advice?
Don't worry too much about grammar. Use English as much as possible. Speak, read, and listen to the language in real-life situations. This approach was perfect for me because I didn't enjoy studying grammar rules. I'll never forget when our teacher introduced us to the concept of shadowing. Shadowing is a technique where you listen to native speakers and repeat what they say in real time. It helped me improve my pronunciation, sentence structure, and rhythm. One of the most frequent questions we asked in class was, "What's the best way to learn new words?" This question wasn't just theoretical, it was a practical challenge we faced every single day. With so many new words flooding our minds, it was easy to feel overwhelmed and forget half of them by the next day. Our teacher had a simple yet powerful answer that changed everything. Our teacher suggested reading for 30 minutes every day, a habit that could transform our learning experience. But not just any book would do, it had to be something that genuinely sparked our interest. She emphasized the importance of finding materials that connected to our passions, whether it was novels, magazines, or articles related to our hobbies. The more engaged you are with the content, she said, the easier it will be to absorb new words. If you're bored with what you're reading, your brain won't retain the information as well. We were encouraged to let our curiosity guide us, taking the time to enjoy each story or article without obsessing over every unfamiliar word. When we encountered a word we didn't know, she advised us to look it up in a dictionary but resist the urge to immediately memorize it. Instead, we continued reading, allowing the word to naturally appear again and again until it became familiar. This method worked wonders for me and quickly became one of my favorite parts of the learning process. Every time I read something I loved, whether it was a gripping detective novel, a travel blog about faraway places, or even a science article, I felt like I was piecing together an intricate puzzle. Each new word I encountered seemed to unlock a new dimension of understanding, gradually building my confidence and fluency. The more I read, the more patterns I noticed. Words that had once seemed foreign and abstract began to feel familiar and natural. I started recognizing how phrases fit together, how prepositions worked in context, and how certain expressions were repeated across different genres. I made it a game. How many new words could I collect in one chapter? Sometimes I would pause to imagine how I might use those words in a conversation. I also kept a small notebook where I jotted down phrases that caught my attention. Not just individual words, but full expressions and sentences. I treated it like a personal language diary, writing down anything that sounded interesting, funny, or useful. By doing this, I learned not only the meaning of words but also how they functioned in real speech. I began to notice patterns, how certain verbs always paired with specific prepositions, how common phrases were structured, and how everyday slang could completely change the tone of a sentence. It was like discovering hidden rules of the language, rules that no grammar book could fully capture. For example, I'd often hear phrases like "take it easy" or "hang in there," and wonder what they truly meant. Each time I noted them down, I made sure to look for similar expressions in conversations, books, or TV shows. I'd try using them in my daily interactions, experimenting with how they fit into different situations. Over time, these collected phrases became part of my daily speech, transforming how I communicated. What once felt foreign and intimidating started to feel natural. My conversations became more fluid, and people around me noticed the change. "You sound more confident," one of my classmates told me during a group discussion. It was those small victories that kept me motivated to continue filling that notebook with new discoveries every day. I began incorporating these newly learned expressions into my conversations. It felt amazing to finally use a word I had just learned and see someone nod in understanding. Each successful interaction motivated me to keep going. Slowly but surely, my vocabulary grew, and so did my confidence.
The best part?
Learning never felt like a chore. Reading became my escape, my teacher, and my daily practice all rolled into one. Over time, my vocabulary grew rapidly. I built a personal word bank that included over 3,000 words within a year. But it wasn't just the quantity of words that made a difference, it was my deeper understanding of how to use them in context. The more I read, the more comfortable I became with sentence structures, idiomatic expressions, and even different writing styles. The key, as our teacher always reminded us, was consistency. Reading every day, even if it was just for 30 minutes, created a rhythm that made learning feel less like a task and more like an adventure. Some days, I would immerse myself in fiction, letting the plot sweep me away while picking up useful conversational phrases. On others, I'd explore nonfiction, learning technical vocabulary that would later prove useful in real-life conversations. What surprised me most was how natural the learning process became over time. Initially, I found myself overwhelmed by the sheer volume of new words, but with each passing day, something magical started to happen. I no longer dreaded looking up new words. Instead, each unfamiliar term felt like a key unlocking a new layer of comprehension. I began to see language as a living, breathing entity, something dynamic and constantly evolving. Bit by bit, my confidence grew. Words that once seemed strange and distant became familiar friends. Every new word became a building block, helping me construct more complex sentences and express my thoughts more clearly. I found myself experimenting with different expressions and idiomatic phrases, adding color and depth to my conversations. Slowly, my conversations became richer, more fluid, and undeniably more spontaneous. Even small moments, like understanding a joke in English or effortlessly responding to a question, felt monumental. Each experience reinforced that I was on the right path, making steady progress. It wasn't just about learning individual words, it was about feeling the rhythm of the language, understanding its subtleties, and embracing its nuances. Every new word I encountered seemed to fit into place the more I read. Over time, I built a vocabulary of over 3,000 words. The key was consistency and reading materials that captured my interest. One of my biggest challenges was pronunciation. I could understand English quite well, but speaking it was another story entirely. Words that seemed clear in my head would get tangled when I tried to say them out loud, often resulting in awkward pauses and incorrect stress on syllables. One of my classmates from South Korea shared the same struggle. He confided that he avoided speaking in class because he felt self-conscious about his pronunciation, which made me realize I wasn't alone in this difficulty. Our teacher, noticing how many of us struggled with this issue, introduced us to a game-changing technique called shadowing. Think of it as your secret weapon for perfecting pronunciation and intonation, she said with a confident smile. You'll listen to a native speaker and repeat everything they say as closely as possible, almost like you're their echo. Don't worry if you can't keep up at first. Your brain will catch on faster than you think. At first, it felt strange and unnatural. I wasn't used to copying every word someone said in real time. My tongue stumbled over unfamiliar sounds, and it felt like my mouth was trying to learn entirely new shapes. The rhythm and intonation of English seemed foreign to me, like an unpredictable melody that I couldn't quite catch. My brain and mouth weren't in sync yet, and I questioned whether I'd ever be able to sound natural. But after a few sessions, something remarkable happened. My muscles started to adjust to these new sounds. The repetitive practice began to build muscle memory, and suddenly, sounds that had once seemed impossible became easier to produce. My pronunciation felt smoother, my confidence grew, and I could mimic not just individual words but entire phrases with their correct intonation and flow. I even started noticing subtle differences in how native speakers emphasized certain words, giving their sentences different shades of meaning. Shadowing turned into a daily ritual for me. I listened to podcasts, radio shows, and short video clips, repeating everything I heard as closely as possible. At first, I could only manage a few seconds of speech before needing to pause and catch up. Over time, though, I could shadow longer sentences without breaking rhythm. It became almost like singing along to a favorite song. Once you've heard it enough times, you know exactly when to jump in and how the melody flows. What amazed me most was how this practice didn't just improve my pronunciation, it transformed my entire approach to listening and speaking. I began to pick up on subtle nuances in speech patterns, noticing how native speakers played with intonation and emphasis to convey different emotions. Each new session sharpened my ear for various accents, making it easier to understand speakers from different regions, whether it was the lilting cadence of an Irish accent or the clipped precision of a British one. The more I shadowed, the more these details started to feel second nature. I found myself automatically adjusting my speech to match the rhythm and flow of native speakers. It was a breakthrough moment when I realized I wasn't just repeating the words, I was truly internalizing them. Shadowing transformed how I processed English. No longer did I rely on translating phrases in my head. Instead, the words flowed naturally, without hesitation or second-guessing. It felt as though I had unlocked a new level of fluency, where language became an instinctive part of how I expressed myself, rather than something I consciously constructed word by word. With each practice session, I noticed huge improvements, not only in how I pronounced words but also in my confidence to speak without hesitation. Shadowing became part of my daily routine. I would listen to podcasts, TED Talks, and even dialogues from my favorite TV shows, repeating everything word for word until it felt second nature. Over time, this technique turned speaking from a nerve-wracking challenge into an exciting part of my learning journey. At first, It felt strange and almost robotic. I wasn't used to copying every word someone said in real time, and my tongue felt clumsy, like it wasn't quite sure how to move in the right way. But I pushed through the discomfort, session after session. Gradually, my muscles adapted, forming new patterns for the unfamiliar sounds. The transition was subtle at first, but then it became undeniable. My pronunciation improved, my rhythm felt more natural, and for the first time, speaking English started to flow without constant hesitation.
Another breakthrough came when I learned about thinking aloud.
Our teacher explained that we should start thinking in English instead of our native language, a mental shift that would help us internalize the language more naturally. At first, it sounded strange, almost impractical. Talk to myself in English? Won't that feel weird? I wondered. But I decided to give it a try, knowing that breakthroughs often come from the most unexpected methods. I started with simple sentences: I'm going to the store. I need to practice my English. These basic sentences felt manageable, almost like a script I could repeat throughout the day. As I grew more comfortable, the sentences became more complex. I began describing my surroundings, narrating my thoughts, and even practicing hypothetical conversations in my head. What would I say if someone asked me about my weekend?
I'd ponder aloud.
Each day, I pushed the boundaries a little further, adding new words and phrases I had recently learned. My monologues evolved from simple statements to detailed reflections about my day. I'm going to the park to read a new book. It's about language learning, and I find it really inspiring. Eventually, thinking in English became second nature, flowing naturally without conscious effort. What started as a strange experiment quickly became one of my most valuable tools for fluency. Not only did it help me expand my vocabulary and improve sentence structure, but it also rewired my brain to think directly in English without needing to translate from my native language. It trained me to switch seamlessly between thought and speech, turning real-life conversations into opportunities for authentic expression rather than moments of anxiety. I began to notice that speaking in English no longer felt like a performance. It became an instinctive response, almost like breathing. The transition from thought to spoken word grew faster and smoother, as if my brain had rewired itself for this new language. I stopped hesitating to search for the perfect phrase because words seemed to flow effortlessly, piecing themselves together in real time. My conversations transformed from carefully constructed sentences into natural exchanges, filled with spontaneity and confidence. This shift made speaking English not just easier but also a joy. It opened the door to deeper connections with people around me, allowing me to express my true thoughts and emotions without the constant mental filter of translation. Thinking aloud didn't just improve my spoken fluency, it transformed how I approached English in every corner of my life. It became more than a tool for practice. It became a way of processing the world around me in a new language. I started narrating my thoughts during walks, creating imaginary dialogues while cooking, and even planning my day aloud in English. This constant verbal rehearsal gave me the freedom to experiment, make mistakes, and self-correct without judgment. Over time, thinking in English became a powerful bridge between my inner thoughts and my spoken words, allowing me to express myself with clarity and confidence. Motivation is everything in language learning. For me, music became a lifeline, a constant source of inspiration and joy. I found myself drawn to the Beatles, their lyrics filled with emotion and vivid imagery that painted pictures in my mind. I would spend hours listening to their songs, repeating the lyrics, and carefully translating them line by line. Each new word felt like a puzzle piece, bringing me closer to understanding not just the language but also the culture behind it. It wasn't just about the music, It was about the stories woven into every song. Yesterday taught me about nostalgia and reflection, while Hey Jude showed me how music could encourage and uplift. Translating these songs was like unlocking hidden messages, and with each discovery, my vocabulary expanded, and my connection to English deepened. I began to sing along with confidence, absorbing not just words but the rhythm and intonation of the language. Music became my private tutor, offering a rich tapestry of lessons in pronunciation, grammar, and colloquial expressions, all without the rigid structure of formal study. Each song felt like a new chapter in a language textbook, but infinitely more engaging. It wasn't just about memorizing lyrics. It was about feeling the language, understanding its cadence, and absorbing its emotional depth. I would listen to a song multiple times, focusing first on the melody, then on how each word was pronounced, and finally on how phrases connected naturally. The repetition helped imprint new vocabulary and expressions in my mind. Singing along became a way of practicing fluency and improving my pronunciation. Even tricky phrases that initially seemed impossible became easier after enough practice. One of my favorite moments was discovering idiomatic expressions hidden in lyrics, words and phrases that weren't in any of the textbooks I'd read. I remember puzzling over the phrase, "let it be," until I understood its comforting simplicity and universal meaning. This process made English feel alive, not just a subject to study but a language full of personality and emotion. Before long, I realized that music had transformed my learning experience entirely. It wasn't just something I looked forward to, it became a cornerstone of my routine. Every morning, I played a new song, challenging myself to learn something from it by the end of the day. These small, consistent efforts accumulated into something powerful, turning me into a more confident and natural speaker. Our teacher often reminded us to find what we love about English and use it as our driving force to stay motivated. She always said that motivation is deeply personal. What excites one person might not resonate with another. For some students, it was reading historical books, immersing themselves in tales of ancient civilizations and forgotten empires. For others, it was preparing for a career abroad, visualizing themselves thriving in international environments, using English as the key to unlock new opportunities. Each student's passion became a unique compass, guiding their language journey and making learning feel less like a task and more like a personal adventure. Practical tip: set small, achievable goals and celebrate your progress frequently. Break your learning into manageable tasks. Whether it's mastering 10 new words a day, practicing shadowing for 15 minutes, or holding a short conversation in English once a week.
Reward yourself for every milestone, no matter how small.
Learning 10 new words a day might seem insignificant at first, but over a month, that's 300 new words added to your vocabulary. Track your achievements and reflect on how far you've come. These small wins build momentum and help keep you motivated for the long journey ahead. I used to be incredibly shy about speaking English. Every time I opened my mouth, I worried that I would mispronounce a word, misuse a phrase, or make a grammar mistake that would leave me embarrassed. The fear of looking foolish often held me back, leaving me silent when I had so much to say. But our teacher gave us a piece of advice that completely changed my perspective. Mistakes are part of the learning process, not something to be afraid of. They're proof that you're trying and improving. She told us to focus on communication rather than perfection, a concept that was both liberating and challenging. I took that advice to heart and decided to speak at every opportunity, no matter how small or informal. I started conversations with classmates, practiced ordering food at local cafes, and even made small talk with strangers on the bus. But the most transformative decision was joining the school's football team. At first, I was hesitant, worried that my limited vocabulary would make it difficult to connect with my teammates. To my surprise, the shared experience of playing sports made communication feel more natural. The team quickly became a supportive environment where I could practice English in a relaxed, pressure-free setting. We joked, strategized, and celebrated victories, all in English. Every practice session became a language lesson in disguise. I learned new slang, how to give instructions on the field, and even how to tease someone in a friendly way, all while becoming more confident in expressing myself. Words like pass, defense, and goal weren't just terms anymore. They became part of my active vocabulary, effortlessly flowing in conversations. The informal, high-energy environment taught me how to think and respond quickly in English, mirroring real-life conversations where there's no time to pause and translate. It wasn't just about learning sports-related vocabulary. The field became a microcosm of real-life communication, where body language, tone, and context filled in the gaps when my vocabulary fell short. Over time, I grew comfortable with casual English expressions and the natural rhythm of conversations, which made communicating off the field much easier. By the end of the season, I realized that the football field wasn't just a place for sports. It was one of the best classrooms I had ever been in, offering lessons far beyond the game itself. One of the highlights of my journey was finding a job at a local cafe, a bustling little spot in the heart of the city, filled with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and the hum of daily conversations. At first, I was worried that my English wouldn't be good enough to handle customer interactions, especially during busy periods. My heart raced every time I imagined a customer asking me something I wouldn't understand. But my boss was incredibly supportive. She welcomed me with open arms and reassured me from day one, saying, "It's okay to make mistakes. Just focus on communicating and learning." Her encouragement made all the difference. Every shift became a new opportunity to practice and grow. At first, I relied heavily on basic phrases and rehearsed responses, but as time passed, I began to experiment with more complex sentences. I learned how to simplify my speech without losing meaning when speaking to non-native customers. At the same time, I adapted my listening skills to pick up different accents and communication styles, which was often a challenge but always rewarding. Some customers spoke quickly, while others had strong regional accents that were unfamiliar to me. There were moments when I struggled to understand, but each interaction became a lesson in patience and active listening. I developed strategies, like repeating key information back to the customer or asking them to clarify in a polite way, to ensure I was communicating effectively. Slowly but surely, I gained confidence in my ability to hold conversations, no matter how small or complex they were. Each successful interaction felt like a victory. I remember the first time a customer complimented me on my English. It felt like I had reached a new milestone. It reinforced my belief that fluency wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence, connection, and the courage to keep trying even when things didn't go perfectly. Every day at work was an opportunity to refine my skills and immerse myself further into real-world English. I constantly adapted, learning how to adjust my tone, pace, and vocabulary depending on the customer's needs. When I encountered customers who spoke little English, I focused on body language and simple expressions to ensure we communicated effectively. For those with strong regional accents, I took it as a challenge to improve my listening skills and decode new speech patterns. Over time, I became adept at switching between formal and casual English, depending on the situation. I mastered polite phrases for customer service like "would you prefer?" and picked up colloquial expressions that added authenticity to my conversations. Each interaction, no matter how brief, was a step forward in my journey, reinforcing that fluency is built one conversation at a time. These daily interactions not only boosted my confidence but also transformed how I engaged with the language.
Not all Englisch sound zusammen.
One day, a customer from Scotland spoke to me with a thick accent, and I couldn't understand a single word. It felt like an entirely different language, and I was caught off guard. Panic surged for a brief moment, but my boss, always calm and supportive, reassured me with a kind smile. Regional accents can be tricky at first, she explained. But don't worry, your ears will adapt with time. Just expose yourself to as many as you can and don't get discouraged. She even recommended a few Scottish TV shows and podcasts, emphasizing that the key was consistent exposure and patience. I started listening to Scottish podcasts and watching TV shows featuring different regional accents. At first, it felt overwhelming, and I had to replay certain parts multiple times just to catch the meaning. But gradually, something shifted. My ears adapted, and I began recognizing familiar patterns and speech rhythms. Within a few weeks, I could understand much more and felt more confident engaging with different accents in real-life conversations. Throughout my journey, I regularly tested my progress to ensure I was on the right track. One particularly helpful tool was an online vocabulary test that became a game-changer for my learning process. It not only showed me how many words I knew but also categorized them by difficulty level: basic, intermediate, and advanced, giving me a clear picture of where I stood. This insight helped me identify areas that needed more attention, whether it was expanding my academic vocabulary or focusing on conversational phrases. Each test felt like a checkpoint, measuring how far I had come and motivating me to push further. I set small, incremental goals after every test, like mastering 50 new words in a month or improving my comprehension in specific topics such as business English. Seeing my progress charted out in numbers gave me a tangible sense of achievement. It wasn't just about the numbers, though. Each test was a reminder that growth was happening, even when it felt slow. Tracking my progress this way turned learning into an exciting challenge. I celebrated every milestone, knowing that each step brought me closer to fluency. This regular self-assessment made the entire journey feel dynamic and purposeful, ensuring I stayed focused and motivated. Recording myself speaking was another powerful tool in my learning arsenal. At first, it felt strange and even a bit uncomfortable to hear my own voice, but over time, it became an invaluable resource. Listening to those recordings allowed me to catch pronunciation mistakes, identify areas where I could improve, and, most importantly, track my progress in a tangible way. Comparing early recordings to more recent ones was a confidence booster. It showed me just how far I had come, reinforcing that steady effort truly pays off. Looking back, I'm so grateful for everything I learned throughout this journey. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone learning a new language, it would be this: read, listen, and speak every single day without fail. It doesn't have to be hours of intense study. Just 30 minutes of consistent practice can transform your skills over time. Make it part of your daily routine, like brushing your teeth or having your morning coffee. Listen to a podcast while walking, read a short article before bed, or talk to yourself in English while preparing dinner. These small, consistent habits will build up in ways you can't even imagine, turning your learning experience into something natural and effortless. Be patient. Language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. Enjoy the journey. Find joy in the little victories. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. They're the best teachers. 1 year after my last day at language school, I found myself standing in front of a classroom full of eager beginners, teaching English. It was a full circle moment, going from a struggling student, nervous and unsure, to a confident teacher guiding others on the same path I once walked. Every lesson I taught was a reflection of my own journey. I shared the techniques that worked for me, from shadowing and thinking aloud to embracing mistakes as learning opportunities. Watching my students improve week after week reminded me of my own progress and reinforced the belief that with persistence, anyone can achieve fluency.
The journey isn't over. It never truly ends.
Language learning is a lifelong adventure filled with continuous discovery and growth. I'm still learning every day, finding new phrases, idioms, and expressions that deepen my connection to English. Each day presents a new opportunity to refine my skills and explore how this language can open doors I never imagined. I hope my story inspires you to persevere, even when the path feels steep and uncertain. There will be setbacks, but every small victory, every word, phrase, and conversation brings you closer to your goal. Remember, it's not just about reaching fluency, it's about enjoying the journey and becoming more confident with every step you take. Thank you for listening to my story. I can't wait to hear about your journey too. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please support me by subscribing to the channel, giving it a thumbs up, and sharing it with your friends. Together, we can build a stronger vocabulary and learn English more professionally. Keep learning, and see you in the next video.